Yes, it started.
So, namaskar all. Happy Independence Day to all. This is the first lecture of Delhi Economics Association. I would request the participants to switch on their video if possible. Professor Thorat is already here, and Professor Thorat doesn't need any introduction to this audience. He was our teacher in JNU, and he is such an eminent economist. So, but still, to do the formality, I would request Jessica. Jessica is teaching in Shama Prasad Mukherjee College for Women's, and she is also doing PhD at our center in JNU. Jessica, would you like to introduce today's speaker, Professor Sukhadeo Thorat, please?
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. Sir does not, of course, need any introduction. To formally introduce Professor Thorat, he is a professor emeritus at Center for the Study of Regional Development at Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is a distinguished professor at Savitri Phule University, Pune, and chair for Human Rights and Social Justice, Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala. He had served as a chairman for UGC, University Grants Commission, as well as ICSSR. Sir was conferred with the Padma Shri in 2008 for literature and education. Thank you.
Sir, over to you.
Okay. Good evening to all of you. Am I sufficiently audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Good evening to all of you. Yes. Happy Independence Day to all of you again. I appreciate this forming of Delhi Economics Group. I hope this group will have interesting discussion on emerging issues and new topics and bring a sort of innovative insight on the contemporary situation. I was asked to speech and give a sort of inaugural lecture. So I decided to share with you my view on what is called socially inclusive growth. This is a word which possibly is not in the literature, but I developed it, and I will give the background of this word. What I will do is to share with you the historical journey of the inclusive growth or an inclusive development over a period of time, and then at the end you will get to know what I mean by socially inclusive growth, particularly in Indian context. When we talk of growth, we essentially talk of growth in increase in the income, and from the point of view of well-being and poverty, we generally take per capita income. So all the models of growth, inclusive growth that have come up earlier, come up now, they have a goal, and goal is that how do we achieve the poverty reduction and increase in the well-being of the people. And yet you have a different concept of growth. So I will share with you this journey of from the what is called growth alone approach to say socially inclusive growth. To sort of make you comfortable, I will discuss with you first the growth alone approach, which was developed somewhere around mid-50 by, it began with Kuznets. Then there was a suggestion in the World Bank itself of redistributive growth in about early mid-70s. Kuznets' idea of growth alone approach emerged in mid-50s with his very important book. And then it led to the development of redistributive growth. Then came the concept of inclusive growth. And inclusive growth then lead to the concept of pro-poor growth. Along with this pro-poor growth, we find occasionally the concept of inclusive development or pro-poor development also. And then at the end, there is a concept which came from Asian Development Bank that was non-discriminatory and disadvantage reducing growth. And then that I find very exciting, and therefore I read it and sort of reflect on it. And in Indian context, I thought it will be better that we use the word socially inclusive growth, which involved necessarily the non-discriminatory and disadvantage reducing growth. There is a lack of clarity on the this concept of non-discriminatory and disadvantage reducing growth. It focuses on rightly, but it doesn't elaborate. So I sort of occasionally started using the word socially inclusive growth. Now, this is the journey of the concept that I will share with you in another 45 or 50 minutes. The policies adopted by the World Bank and IMF were largely governed by what is called a growth-alone approach. The growth-alone approach was the word used by Martin Ravellian with respect to Kuznets, Simon Kuznets. Now, in mid-50s, Simon Kuznets brought out that voluminous book wherein for the first time, he developed a time series data on income, GDP for USA, and study the movement of the income vis-a-vis the inequality. And based on that movement of income in the growth and its relation with inequality, Simon Kuznets came with the conclusion is that the growth in the income will help in the well-being of the people, reduction in poverty, automatically. So he suggests, as he recommended the policies, that the growth model that various countries should adopt should focus only on how to expand the income and thereby the per capita income, which means that the rate in the growth rate in the income should be much higher than the population growth rate, so that the per capita income also increase at a faster rate. And per capita income is considered as an indicator of well-being, because if every person have some money into their hand, then they can meet their basic requirement. Now, Kuznets' argument was that based on the American data, he found that in the initial stages, you may be knowing about it, in the initial stages of increase in the income, the inequality will increase, which means that the very larger proportion of the increased income will go to the relatively rich people and less to the low-income people. As a result, there will be widening in the gap between the income, per capita income of the rich and the per capita income of the poor. And then this was the first proposition. The second proposition is that after some time, there will be a plateau, and then the income will begin to reach the poor. And as a result, poverty will get reduced, well-being will increase. So the Kuznets' famous inverted U curve, that in the beginning, along with the increase in the income, inequality will increase, but later on the inequality will decrease, and the income will trickle down. That is the word used. Income will trickle down to the poor. And as a result, the well-being of the people will improve. That is the basic hypothesis and recommendation of Simon Kuznets. If you read Piketty's book, there is a very excellent discussion on the Simon Kuznets' theoretical approach. And his lecture after he received a Nobel Prize, and how he sort of indirectly recognized the growth-alone approach. Now, between the mid-50s and the 70s, nothing much happened. Nobody wrote much on this. World Bank and IMF accepted this approach, recommended to the developing countries. Now, this approach, growth loan approach, has another dimension. One important point which you should remember is that Simon Kuznets indirectly also suggesting that please don't interfere. State should not interfere in the growth process. Allow the growth to happen by the private sector. So the famous ceteris paribus assumption, everything assuming the same, that is, if the state doesn't, state should not intervene and allow the private sector to follow the strategy of their own growth alone strategy. So that's a basic understanding at that point of time. In the 70s, early 70s and the mid 70s, people began to raise the doubt. They began to raise the doubt because increase had increased at a faster rate, but the poverty had not declined or income of the poor has not increased at the same rate. As a result, inequality has increased. The first group of persons who brought out this to the notice of the World Bank was Popnik and Montek Singh Ahluwalia, and there are two others. And the name of the book is Redistribution Through Growth. So they focus more on redistribution and growth come later. Their argument briefly was and is that although the income has increased at a faster rate in developing countries, including some of the Latin American countries, the income of the poor had not increased at the proportionate rate. The increase in the income of a relatively rich had increased at a much slightly higher rate than that of the poor. As a result, the trickle-down mechanism, strong trickle-down mechanism didn't happen. And inequality increased and poverty remained high. That was the basic sum argument of Popnik and Montek Singh Ahluwalia and others. There are two other authors. This book was published somewhere around 1970 in the World Bank. Popnik was in the World Bank. So he was then addressing to the World Bank itself that Kuznets growth alone model has limitation. In a later one or two articles, Montek Singh Ahluwalia pointed out the other factor, that what are those factors which matters from the point of view of trickling down of income to the poor. He mentioned 2-3 factors. First is the investment by the government. So role of the government is important, which in the Kuznets model is supposed to be neutral, but the public investment and investment by the government is matter. Then the growth of the non-household sector, manufacturing sector does matter. And government policies also matter for the poor. So they point out that the income growth alone is not important. There are supplementary factors which are necessary. And if income of the poor has to increase, these factors will have taken into account. So that was the argument of in the mid-70s by Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Popnik, and others. As a result, by the time we reached 2000, there was a sort of full recognition of the fact that growth alone or income alone cannot reduce poverty. You require additional policies. And therefore, the concept of inclusive growth came at that very point, that the growth should be such that it increase the income of all, but particularly for the poor person. And then there is a discussion that what is inclusive growth and how to achieve it. There were two approaches here. There was a first question of definition. The definition of inclusive growth was, at that point of time, was that if the growth increased the income of all, including the poor, we can consider this as an inclusive growth. And to be able to achieve that inclusive growth, the argument was that your strategy of growth itself has to be changed. the strategy and the growth model has to be factored into the growth itself, which will lead to the increase in the income of all. That was the broader understanding. But some of the people then began to ask the question that this inclusive growth, which talks about increasing the income of all, is not an appropriate approach. The income of the poor should increase more proportionately than the income of the other. If the goal of the growth is to reduce poverty and well-being, it has to focus on the poor. So there was a debate in the UNDP, particularly the Inclusive Development Center of UNDP Brazil. They bring out a one-pager. It's a sort of a news journal, but one-pager. All that you have to write, you write such a short that in one paper it comes out. And there is a debate about what is pro-poor growth and what is inclusive growth. There are two people who participate in the debate, particularly there are others also. But two prominent people are Martin Ravelian and Dr. Kakwani. Kakwani was with UNDP at that point of time. Kakwani is Indian economist, very celebrated in economics. He did his master from Kurukshetra University and became a very world-renowned economist. And he continued to write on inclusive growth, inclusive development, inclusive growth, pro-poor growth, inclusive development, pro-poor development. In fact, his recent paper has come in 2023. He gave a presentation to Niti Aayog, so I'll discuss that later on. But the major point that you have to remember is at that time there was a discussion and controversy about what constitutes inclusive growth and what constitutes a pro-poor growth, which is a component of inclusive growth. Martin Ravelian argued that inclusive growth is obviously the increase in the income of everybody, but the pro-poor growth, we can define poor growth if income increase is positive, that income is increasing, it is positive, and that it results into decline in poverty, aggregate poverty. That was the concept of Martin Ravelian. Now, Kakwani criticizes very heavily. He says that this is not a concept which will reduce poverty. And he gave his reason. The reason was that whenever there is an increase in the income, generally speaking, exception apart, some income will go to the poor, and as a result, poverty will decline. But Martin Ravelian is not talking about the magnitude of declining in poverty. If it is a pro-poor growth, then substantially speaking, the income of the poor should increase substantially and poverty should decline. Otherwise, by Martin Ravelian's concept of inclusive growth, every growth is pro-poor growth. So Kakwani said, no, pro-poor growth has to be defined in a manner such that the income of the poor increase quite substantially and their poverty reduced. This is the one point. And second point Kakwani made is that there were two arguments at that point of time about the strategy. Some were arguing that let the increase in the income happen. Government income through the taxes will increase, and then government can spend that amount on the poor, and poverty can reduce. This was something like, when our finance minister, the minister of Congress was talking about in UPA 1 and UPA 2. Let the growth be there and we will collect the income through income tax, and then we will develop several pro-poor program like Narega or others. But the others were arguing no. Kakwani and others were there. They were arguing no, that the strategy of economic growth should be such that it is inbuilt in the growth process, whereby the growth itself result into increase in the income of the poor, and not by a government scheme or so. So, which means that the growth strategy has to have an inbuilt strategy and policy which will automatically result in the increase in the income of the poor. That was this one point of discussion at that time. There are other who sort of enter into the debate, and they try to define the pro-poor growth. That's very important. They say that if it has to be pro-poor growth, then there are additional indicators which you should take into account to measure the pro-poor growth. One is that general indicator is that the percentage increase in the income of the poor should be more than the percentage income of the non-poor. So that you can then say that the growth increase in the income of the poor is focus on the poor. Somebody again argued by giving an additional indicator that the growth can be called pro-poor provided the rate of growth in the income of the poor in the current year is more than that of preceding year. Then you can say that the growth is in the current year is pro-poor. So the proportionate increase in the income of the poor in the current year should be higher than that of last year. So increasingly you can say with that indicator that the growth is being pro-poor. The other also added some indicator that the increase in the income of the poor should be much higher than some international standard, indicator of international standard. Michael Lipton also wrote and said that the increase in the income of the poor in rural areas should be more than the increase in the income of the urban, because the rural poor are more poor. So you can see that there was a whole lot of discussion in that one pager identifying the indicators. I have given in my paper, which is published in the EPW, how socially inclusive is the growth. And there I have given this indicator. It is in EPW. The co-author is Amresh Dubey. So this is the debate which went on in around 2000. And finally, the World Bank accepted that yes, we should adopt it as a matter of policy at the World Bank level, that we promote not only growth alone approach, but we promote socially inclusive growth and the pro-poor growth. An agreement was signed between different countries, and I think Monte Singh Ahluwalia is the signatory of that agreement and the recommendation to the developing country of the growth strategy. And it has reflected very directly, as you see, if you look at the 11th and the 12th plan, it is named as the inclusive growth plan. And then it has been defined what is inclusive growth. So that is how the inclusive growth strategy finally landed in the World Bank. There was also then discussion about, that instead of, because pro-poor growth is income-based. So there was a discussion about the pro-poor development, pro-poor inclusive development. And development has more than one indicator. Human Development Index of UNDP, it doesn't take only per capita income into account, but it takes illiteracy and the life expectancy. Another indicator, child mortality. So some of them began to write then pro-poor development and inclusive development. But the concept is the same. They are taking only multiple indicators. Coming to the little I was going to say later on, but at this very stage also, I would like to mention then that Piketty's book, The Capital, has came with the finding which blow up the Kuznets hypothesis altogether. That is that the Kuznets idea of inverted U curve in income inequality, increasing in the beginning, getting stagnant, and then declining. And the period of Kuznets end with 40s. Piketty took the data from the 40 onward till very recently, and he discovered that there is no inverted U curve. There is a complete straight line. The inequality keep on increasing. And it really did not trickle down to the poor substantially. Inequality keep on rising. So he used very strong word that the Kuznets curve is no more there. And then he has given alternative policies and all that. I will not go into greater detail. Now, this is the experience of which comes through developing countries, people intervening into the debate, World Bank accepting and advising to the various developing country, and country like India has really translated into their 5-year plan, and the 11th and 12th 5-year plan are described as the inclusive development. And I'll come to that concept later, what concept has been used by India as far as the inclusive development is concerned. Then there are people who intervene in the debate. There are people from Asian Development Bank. And the Asian Development Bank people sort of were slightly unhappy because their experience of development was slightly different than that of other countries, Africa, Latin America, including China. And so their various deviation of inclusive growth began to appear. There was a paper by a Chinese scholar and another scholar there who began to talk about equal opportunity, growth with equal opportunity. And then this led to an additional thought on the part of Carlson. Carlson was in Asian Development Bank. He still is advisor, I think, but he is a Dutch gentleman. He took an entire review of inclusive policies in about 2010, and very interesting paper. You should read it. That gives the entire history of the development of concept of inclusive growth and pro-poor growth. And he argued that the Asian model was that Asian countries, many of them are characterized by multiple social group, ethnic group, and indigenous group, tribal population, another, and that they had to take care of those groups in the process of participation in the growth process. And then, therefore, he argued that there are indication in the experiment of the Asian countries that they develop strategies or some sort of strategies to overcome the discrimination in participation. The Chinese scholar has already pointed out that the growth should be such that there is an equal opportunity to everybody. And Carlson argues that some of the ethnic group and indigenous group face discrimination in participation in the market. And so they cannot avail the equal opportunity. And then he gave some evidence that some of the countries had developed policies to see that the growth is non-discriminatory, that growth provide an equal opportunity. So he doesn't discuss the policy in greater detail, that whether they had used affirmative action policy or reservation policy. He doesn't talk about reservation policy in India. But he said that there are elements in those growth policies where there was strategy against discrimination so that there is equal participation in the growth, in employment, in market, and all that. And then he used another word called that the growth is such that it is not only non-discriminatory, but it is disadvantage reducing of these social groups. These groups face certain disadvantages, and the growth should be such that it reduces the disadvantage of the discriminated group, and growth is non-discriminatory. That is what he argued. Now, I read it carefully, but it's hit a proper nail into this issue of non-discrimination, but he doesn't go into greater detail that what exactly is the nature of non-discriminatory growth, what exactly he mean when he talk about the disadvantage reducing growth. What he mean by disadvantage reducing non-discriminatory growth was equal opportunity. And fair opportunity, and that's all. I don't see anything more than that in that paper. Another paper his. As far as the disadvantage reducing growth is concerned, he is saying that disadvantage growth should be such that the inequality between the social group and the rest should be reduced. That's how he defined disadvantage reducing growth. Now I see that concept of non-discriminatory growth and disadvantage reducing growth is an improvement over the inclusive growth and pro-poor growth alone, because it look at the increase in the income and reduction in the poverty within the various social group and other groups. And given that there is a discrimination between, he brought gender also, given that there is a discrimination between the minorities and social group vis-a-vis the other, and that they face discrimination, the growth should be non-discriminatory in participation, and it should be equally participate. In disadvantage reducing, he only try to measure the disadvantage by referring it to the inequality between the group, social group, and the major population. So the gap should be reduced. But he didn't go deep inside. Now, therefore, I look at it and sort of develop socially inclusive growth concept. It's very tentative. But my understanding is as follows, that one has to build up on the non-discriminatory growth. And we have to build up on disadvantage reducing growth. The concept are very important. What can be the non-discriminatory growth in Indian context and in the universal context also? Now, before we talk about the Indian context, we have to define what is discrimination. And discrimination in economic sphere, and discrimination in market and non-market. Now we get some insight from the theories of economic of discrimination and developed by Gary Becker first, then which is built up by Kenneth Arrow, further expanded by others, but prominently by Akraloff. And then there is very good theoretical writing by William Darity, an African-American, a Marxist economist. The insight that we get from these theories, I am only putting them. In fact, Akraloff then finally brought out a book, Identity Economics. If you want to read this, so he developed into a full-fledged economic branch of identity economics. He and Cantum is from the Duke University, and so they brought out a book. But if I put together, this is what I understand by discrimination. There is a book of mine which is coming based on my lifetime writing. It will come within a month or two by Rawat publication. There are two chapters. One is the review of the theories of economics of discrimination, and in a very simple word, because these are all econometrics model, and then also review of economic theories of caste. That was quite messy, but I have sort of in the light of those theory, I have also conceptualized what does economics of caste mean and economics discrimination of caste mean. That will come in 2-3 months, and I think it will bring a lot of clarity. But let me share with you what discrimination I mean. By economic theories of discrimination mention that in a society there are social categories: ethnic, color, race, gender. And these categories have norms as to how to behave with the other group. Now, we are aware about the social norms. Sociologists have done quite a lot of work on that. But what these theories are talking about is the norms with respect to economic behavior, norm with respect to participation in the market, norms with respect to hiring of one group by the other, social group, not by the individual, but by the group. Business transaction. So they have these economic norms. And then Akrelov and other criticizing Gary Baker argued that this economic norm decide how one group will behave with the other. So the norms are factored into your economic relations. And they decide how one group will behave with other group. And essentially, the third point that they make is that the norms are such that they are discriminatory. One group discriminated against the other group in hiring, in conducting business with the other group, and all the economic sphere. That is the basic message of the theories of discrimination. They also argued that the motive is maybe pecuniary or non-pecuniary, economic or non-economic. Basically, Gary Baker says that the motive is psychological satisfaction, utility maximization, because he was influenced by the new classical economics. Gary Baker's supervisor was Milton Friedman. So he brought that utility maximization. You discriminate because you get satisfaction from discrimination by favoring the person of your own color. But William Darity and others argue that no, the basic motive is materialistic, economic gain. By paying lower wages to the black, you are benefiting. So economic gain is the major motive that they argued. And then they discuss the consequences. Akrelov and others, they argue that insofar as you discriminate, those and do not pay them as per their productivity, do not hire them based on their productivity, and the norms and the others come into play, the unemployment rate or discriminated group will be higher, wages will be lower, so wage income will be lower, poverty will be high. So they have mentioned the sort of identify the connection between discrimination and income and poverty. That's the basic, I think. And then they have mentioned remedies, which I will not go into greater detail, but that is the concept, general insight that we get. Now, I took this all baggage, academic baggage from theories of discrimination, and then try to look at the caste. So the second chapter in my book deals with the economic theory of caste system. Now, economics of caste system, is an area which suffered very badly in Indian economics profession. When I look into the literature, then I discovered there are three people who have written on economics of caste system or given a theoretical explanation to define the economic dimension of the caste. One is, of course, the Akrelov, who wrote these theories of economics of discrimination, brought out a book. He was in Indian Statistical Institute. He spent some time, and in the article that he has worked, I think, for which he has got a Nobel Prize, I was told was part of the work was done here by Gary Baker. So Gary Baker wrote the theory of caste. Then it was followed by a gentleman called Scoveley from Minnesota University. He has written 2 articles on that. And third one was Deepak Lal. Although he is an Indian, he spent most of his life in UK, I think. Deepak Lal's 2-volume book, Hindu Equilibrium, is very important. So these are the only 3 people. Now you can see that there is nobody from India who has really applied his mind on the economic theories of caste. There are books which talks about economic dimension of the caste system. But theory, what does theory tell? Theory define what is economic discrimination related to caste and untouchability. What are the causes? What are the motive, what are the consequences? That constitute the question that theory addresses. Now, these people, these three economists, they wrote this in neoclassical framework. And they didn't study the caste system as such. They studied whatever extent they might have studied, but they come to the following conclusion that caste system, insofar as is not, it doesn't allow the freedom in the market to buy the good and sell the good, hiring, employment, wages. There is a discrimination. The mobility of the factors of production is restricted, therefore it is imperfect. The high caste will prefer the person of his own caste and not the person of low caste, even if his efficiency is high. High caste will hire a low caste person, for example, or a woman, hire a woman, but would not give the wages according to the productivity, marginal productivity, less than that. So, since it's not working on the economic principle, they are saying that there are restriction on mobility, on occupation and investment also, as a theoretical thing, because the occupation and the property right are fixed across the caste. As a result, there is an imperfection in the market, and then they reduce their famous theory that imperfection brings a less than optimum outcome, less than what is called Pareto optimality. So that is the simple message. We don't get much from the theories of caste written by the three neoclassical economists. The only indication is that the market work in an imperfect manner insofar as in caste there is no full mobility and freedom, and as a result, the economic outcome is less than optimal, Pareto optimal. That is there, but we don't get it. I think then I discovered that the only person who has really gone into the economics of caste system in a deeper way was Dr. Ambedkar. And Dr. Ambedkar's writing has come in a very varied form. It's not very systematic, especially the economic writing. He wrote quite substantially on this. He has a book on Who Were Shudras, and he has a detailed discussion on the caste system and economics of caste system in chapter 3 and 4. Then he wrote Who Were Untouchable, and there is a greater discussion on economic dimension of untouchability. Then he wrote Philosophy of Hinduism, where he examined the caste system from economic point of view. Then there are two more essays, the essential feature of the caste system and a unique feature of the caste system, and their economic dimension, and there are other writing. So I sort of read all this and took out the economic part of it. And I discovered that Ambedkar's theoretical theorization of economics of caste system is in tune with the theories of economic discrimination developed in US. Now, Ambedkar did not have an advantage of reading the economic theories of discrimination developed in US because the Gary Baker's first book came in 1956, and Ambedkar died in 1956. And then Arrow, another thing after 70. So he did not have advantage of theories of economic discrimination developed related to the race and gender and color. But he just interpreted the caste system is, in addition to his social, cultural, religious angle, the economic aspect also. And then you see that there are very clear features that are similar to the economic theories of discrimination. Now, there are 4 or 5 features I would like to just mention and then stop. Well, Dr. Ambedkar says that the caste system involved division of the people into 5 categories. Now, it not only divides the people, but it also fixed the economic right. Besides social and religious, we are not concerned with that. It also decides the economic right of each of the caste and their occupation. Basically, property right, which by occupation we mean property right. And but then these rights, economic rights, are then assigned and entitled across the caste in an unequal manner, and in a graded inequality. And they are fixed and they are not to be changed. And they are based on the birth. These are the basic economic features. So you find that the occupation of Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra in Manusmriti is fixed. The teaching and preaching is the occupation of Brahmin. Military is the occupation of Kshatriya. The trade and commerce is that of Vaishya. Agriculture is, in fact, the agriculture was with also Vaishya, and Shudra job is only served the caste above them. Occupations are fixed. They cannot be changed. That is why the neoclassical say that there is immobility in the occupation and there is no freedom as such. But the Shudra job is, of course, to serve the three high caste. There is a discussion in the literature. I would like to spend more time. There is a discussion in the literature that in Manusmriti there are only 4 castes. There is no caste, 5th caste. Although the Manu recognized the presence of the outcast, but there was no untouchable caste at that time. Untouchable caste emerged later on. There is a general agreement that untouchable caste and untouchability emerged around AD 400. Although the Vivekananda Jha in his recent book, Chandala, says that the roots goes to BC 600, during even Buddha's period. But the untouchability in the sense of touch-me-notism, unapproachability, systematic form emerged in around 400 AD. That is what Ambedkar also put that date in his book, Who Were Untouchable, and others also. The word Aspursha is a Sanskrit word which came for the first time in Vishnu Smriti around AD 300. So the big point is that untouchable as a 5th caste emerged and got integrated into the caste system. And that is how we have 5 castes. But untouchable group come much later. There is one more change that has come later, that Shudra, which did not have right to property according to the Manusmriti very clearly, they began to get the right of cultivation of land. And so there are references around 700 AD, the Shudras were allowed to own the land and cultivate the land. First tenant and then owner. So the occupation of agriculture, which was with the Vaishya, was shifted to Shudra. So you have, in the current period, the Brahmin, which has a right to preach and teach and learn, Kshatriya in the defense, Vaishya in trade and commerce, and agriculture with the Shudra, and untouchable really became the propertyless who was required to serve the others. Now, so you can see that the classification, the entitlement of property right is unequal, and it is also graded. As you go down in the caste hierarchy, the economic right goes down. There is one particular point that I would like to mention is that there is a recent, very clearly empirical evidence, although Ambedkar has written that the untouchable were required to serve as a labor, casual manual labor. They were not allowed to serve in a better quality of employment with the high caste, but as a manual labor with all the 4 castes. But the labor status of the labor was unfree, attached, and predominantly slave labor. The slave labor means that they are the owner of the property, they are the property of the owner, and they can be, once you are a property, then you are a property. You can be sold, you can be sold, you can be rented out, you can be killed, your family can be separated. And there is now a very sufficient evidence on this, that untouchable were a slave caste. And the Sanal Mohan's book, which has come about a couple of 2 years ago, it described the slavery, untouchable slavery in a greater detail. So I think the Amit Thorat is working on this. So he has published one article along with one person, Mohammed Akil, I think he is in some other university. They published an article on untouchable slave and reparation, that kind of thing. Now, let me summarize on this. So the economics of caste system as conceived by Dr. Ambedkar is this, that caste system involved the entitlement and division of economic right, including the right to property and employment and wages across the caste. And this is based on the entitlement of right, economic right is unequal, and that there is a discrimination, in the sense denial of equal right, and there are restrictions and they are fixed. So the discrimination is an inherent part of the economic relations of the caste system. Now it has its outcome. If you are denied right to property, outcome is economic inequality and poverty and deprivation, and the whole burden fell on the untouchable because they do not have any right. The graded inequality concept is very important, that as you go down in the caste hierarchy, the economic right goes down, and untouchable who are located at the bottom of the caste hierarchy have no economic right except the manual wage laborer in the form of a slave or caste or attached laborer. As late as 1982, we passed, I think, Bonded Labor Act in 1976. And there are statistics brought out by the SCST Commission in 1982 that 80 to 90% bonded labor are scheduled caste. So the attached labor and this concept is the legacy of the slave labor as such. So this is the economic characteristics of the caste system. Basically, it involves denial of equal right and equal opportunity. That is the key thing that comes. Second is the motive. The motive in the caste system is sheer economics. There is a motive of high social status by the Brahmin and Kshatriya or Vaishya or Shudra, but internally the motive is economics. Those economic rights are denied. There is one concession which deliberately Manu has given. You must read Manu Smriti. Manu has given that although these occupations are fixed, not to be changed, Manu has given complete freedom to the Brahmin to do any occupation if he or she require, except the occupation of the untouchable. So they could be going to the military, they can be cultivator, they can enter into business. That's how you explain that in Bihar and UP and many other parts, how come Brahmins are farmer, own large chunk of land and get into cultivation through slave labor. The Brahmins were also into military. They formed the kingdom, Peshwa. And they were very big warriors. Sadashivara, Peshwe, and others fought with the Lodi and the Muslim kings. So they went into the military. Same is the story of businessman, Kirloskar. So the point is that there was a full freedom for the Brahmin to take any occupation if they don't survive from their traditional occupation. So motive is economics and material gain. But at the same time, you deny the same right to others. So there is a discrimination as such, market discrimination. Now this discrimination, then I sort of developed that concept further in Indian Institute of Dalit Study, that how do we measure market discrimination associated with caste and untouchability? Market discrimination was studied with respect to race, and with respect to untouchability and caste, it was very difficult. But we developed that concept of market discrimination and measure it. And the book will give you the discrimination faced by scheduled caste farmer, scheduled caste business person, and scheduled caste wage worker, regular, casual, non-casual. Estimation and their impact also. I have my book, I think, which has come only a couple of months before, Scheduled Caste and Labor Market, Discrimination in the Employment and its Impact on Poverty, by Oxford. I don't know whether you have seen. So it proves now, it proves that there is a discrimination in employment. So, but that is based on the concept of we developed in the institute, and also developed the questionnaire, collected the data. There were problems, so step by step we arrived at some concept. Then there is another improvement that we made in the concept was non-market discrimination. Market discrimination means where goods are exchanged at a price. Now the services and goods which are given by the government, in public employment, midday meal and others, there also there is a discrimination. So we did that study, and we developed the concept of non-market discrimination and captured the discrimination that is faced by the untouchable. As soon as I became the director of Indian Institute of Study in 2003, I asked Sangamitra to study the discrimination in primary health center, and she did that, and it is published in that book, Blocked by Caste, Economic Discrimination. Then I also asked Geeta Nammeshan to study the discrimination in the school. She did it and discovered that way back in 2003, we discovered the discrimination in the school as such. But the recent study for this 8th state took the midday meal and IDRC and another scheme, and So there is a book, second book of mine, which is coming, which will give you the discrimination in market and the government. So this is how I've spent a lot of time. Why I say that Carlson's concept of non-discriminatory growth doesn't spell out in a clear term what does discrimination mean, how does it prohibit the equal opportunity, how does it affect. And if the growth has to be there, then this non-discriminatory growth has to be such that there is no discrimination in all the market, all transaction that takes place or exchange that takes place in the market. And also the exchange that takes place from the government organization. So you can see the deeper meaning of it. Second is disadvantage reducing growth. Again, he has not defined the disadvantage. What are the disadvantages of the discriminated group? The disadvantage of discriminated group, in my view, are the following. He only say that inequality between the discriminated and non-discriminated group can be called as a disadvantage. If the discriminated group are lagging behind by whatever indicator or per capita or whatever, which means that there is disadvantage. But what exactly the disadvantage and what caused disadvantage has not been explained by him. My analysis of disadvantage is the following: that because in Indian context particularly, because the lower caste, particularly the untouchable, were denied right to property, right to business, right to good employment in the occupation of the high caste, except the manual labor. This result, and this remained over a period of I think couple of centuries. If you take the date of untouchability is somewhere around AD 400. So, and take 1950 as a benchmark, where in the constitution, we abolish untouchability and all that. So almost for 1800 years, there is a continuous denial of right to property, right to education particularly. So it results into landlessness, assetlessness, and illiteracy. Besides the untouchability in social sphere and all that, I am not taking, we are focusing on economics. So the result of discrimination in economic sphere was denial of property right, business, and education resulted into landlessness, assetlessness, and education, illiteracy. So this is the disadvantage. And you have to reduce this disadvantage. Reducing growth means increasing the ownership of capital asset in terms of land and non-land asset and education. So when I define socially inclusive growth and development, I essentially mean two aspects. One, reduce providing safeguard against discrimination in participation in the market and non-market. There should not be discrimination. The scheduled caste should have equal access to in the market for employment, for purchase of input and sale of output, and loan and any other things, and that there should be policies in a manner such that their ownership of land increase, business increase, and education will expand. Then you can call it a non-discriminatory and disadvantage reducing growth. I think I am still building on it. Kakwani has brought out a recent paper, and in my comment, I wrote back to him that your inclusive growth suffered from one particular problem, is that you are not taking the discriminated groups because they have a problem of inclusion. The Amartya Sen has written a wonderful paper. This was a discussion paper by Asian Development Bank. Asian Development Bank called him to write a paper on social exclusion because they were very sensitive in Asian context. And such a powerful concept has been given by Amartya Sen: unfavorable exclusion and favorable exclusion, and which I used in developing the concept of market and non-market. Very useful concept. But yet, Amartya Sen did not really did not use the discrimination, how discrimination lead to reduction of capability. He gave the concept of capabilities and functioning. But how does discrimination affect capability? How does caste discrimination affect capability of owning the property and education and other thing? I don't know. There is a very quiet silence on the part of Amartya Sen as far as the economics of caste is concerned. So I think this is what I mean, and I'm evolving this. So I think I have presented before you the whole journey of the concept of growth alone approach, inclusive approach, pro-poor growth, definition of pro-poor growth, then discriminatory, non-discriminatory, disadvantage reducing growth, and then the way I understand this and talking about the socially inclusive growth. There are several aspects of this. I don't have time that you have to. I will summarize by saying that Kakwani and others argue that your growth process, this is all within the framework of the private economy. Your growth strategy should be such that it factor in the strategies which will automatically help the poor. They are not in favor of have a growth, collect the money through taxation, and then develop the government scheme. No, the growth process itself should be socially inclusive and pro-poor. What I am adding it to it, that your growth strategy should be such that even the discriminated group also can participate and avail those without discrimination, and they have equal opportunity. But in the process, their disadvantages are also reduced, that their ownership of capital asset increase so that they have income, their education level increase so that they can, their employability is improved and they get employment. I think these are some of the points that I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. It was fascinating lecture. In fact, extremely thought-provoking. I'm sure there will be some questions probably. If
Please go ahead, but let me just allow to drink a water and then I'll come back.
Sure, sir. Right, sir. Right, sir. Right, sir. Can we switch on our video mode now? So that sir can see some of us. Please ask some questions to sir. I'm sure he has talked about many interesting things. So if you can kindly switch on your video mode and unmute yourself one by one and then ask some questions to sir maybe.
There is a question in the chat box.
Yes, let him come back first and then we can.
Yes.
Yeah, Preksha. Preksha is teaching in Ramanujan College and she is also doing PhD at our center. So Preksha,
Yeah.
can you read it out? There is a question in the chat box maybe.
Yes, sir. There's a question from Rajiv Khanna, sir.
Yeah.
He's asked that what are the specific policies you would recommend to overcome the social discrimination in the current context?
Okay. The policies for the discriminated group will be determined by the nature of the problems. And we get some lesson from, again, from Dr. Ambedkar and nobody else. He suggested the following policies, and then I will say why he suggested the following policy, and I would say that he was the pioneer in the world because all affirmative action policy elsewhere came after 1960s. Some policies came in the 18th century in USA, legal safeguard against discrimination, but not the affirmative action policy. So Ambedkar was, we can consider he was sort of an innovator in that respect. First thing is that he gave 4 or 5 policies. One is that there should be equal civil right to all, because caste system denied equal right, equal civil right. Access to public services, access to property, access to property resources, access to your personal right, you know, what kind of clothes you wear, whether you ride on bicycle, whether you use boot while walking to the locality of high caste. So denial of personal right, denial of public services, right to property, of course, political right, and see, this is all denial before the independence. So he suggested everybody should have equal citizenship right, which the Constitution gives. Number one. Number two, if those rights are denied because of discrimination on the basis of caste and untouchability, then you should have legal protection, law against discrimination, so that those who practice law are punished. And those who face discrimination, they have a right to go to the court and get the justice. So second solution that he suggested was a law against caste and untouchability. So you will see that in Indian Constitution, in the fundamental right, untouchability is banned and made subject to punishment. And immediately in 1955, Untouchability Offence Act was passed, where there are, at the moment, there are several behavior of the high caste which are considered to be illegal. Then third is that this, even if there is a law, the untouchable would not get an equal access into those areas on which their development depends. So there's a discrimination in employment, both public and private. At that time, there was no entry to the untouchable in military and police. There were restrictions on starting business and even agricultural land. So he suggested that there should be some mechanism whereby they are assured of equal participation and share. That is, that they are given some share, and then the concept came: what should be the share? Then the population share. So the third policy was of reservation, whereby you ensured a share in public employment, in legislature, in parliament, and in education institution in proportion to the population, because discrimination persists. So it should be there. This is the third policy that he has suggested. The fourth is, of course, he suggested that there should not be only equal share in legislature, member of parliament, but also in executive. The executive means minister and policy maker. They should have a share in the policy maker so that they can participate in policy making. And that there should be, fifth one, there should be an organization which will study the status of the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe from time to time and make suggestion. So the SC/ST commission was set up. Now there is a SC commission separate, SC commission separate. There is a OBC commission, there is a DNT commission. Now there is a chain of commission. This is all because of Ambedkar. So these are the 5 suggestions that Dr. Ambedkar had given. This is one set of policy: legal safeguard and policy to give a fair share, and that is a reservation policy. And then there is a share in the executive and certain mechanism. But there is a fourth policy which he has suggested, and that was the policy to increase the ownership of property. That is land, business, and education. So he asked for the redistribution of land, a cultivable land, to the scheduled caste, landless scheduled caste. But later on, his ideology got changed, and he talked about socialism, state socialism, where he supported nationalization of the land and distribution of land to everybody, and basic and key industry with the government. So the one set of policy is a disadvantage reducing policy, that is to give them the land, and also the policy for business promotion. So scheduled caste corporation was set up, that you give funding to the scheduled caste so they start businesses. And third is to promote education, because reservation in education institution only give the share in the admission, but they are all poor. So he suggested financial support to the student to promote higher and school education, beside others. Then in 1943, he introduced 2 scholarships. One is post-matric scholarship, that after you enter into college, you get the scholarship automatically. That scholarship still continues. He started in 1943, it continues even today. And then he suggested overseas scholarship to do PhD outside. So you can see that there are 3 sets of policies which Dr. Ambedkar suggested. One is equal civil rights, citizenship right, law against untouchability, legal safeguard, then for the fair share, reservation policy, and then a policy which will increase their ownership of private property, business and land, and policies to promote the education. He, because of limitation on his part, he could not introduce reservation in private sector because that was too much for him to take in the Constitutional Assembly. They would not have accepted possibly. But today, because there is a heavy privatization move, I think I look at the figure today that the share of the public employment is maybe about 20% or less than that. So more than 80% of jobs are in private sector where there is a huge discrimination. I have brought out in that book. So the reservation policy not in private sector where bulk of the employment is there. As a result, you see unemployment and poverty among the scheduled caste. So these are some of the policies that Dr. Ambedkar proposed, which need to be reformed and revised.
So we have a couple of other questions. There's one question by Arshid. Sir is asking that generally when discussing the political economy of caste, the focus is on Indic religion, especially Hinduism, as mentioned in the Ambedkar essays. However, the caste hierarchy in Islam and Christianity in India is similar to that in Hinduism and others. Is there any discussion of this in your upcoming book or your previous books?
No, there I will only provide the clarification that I think we did partially some discussion, but not much. One first question is that Ambedkar, although used the Hindu word, there is nothing like a Hinduism in terms of ideology. That must be very clear. All have written about it. Lalmani Joshi and other. What you have is Brahmanism. There is nothing like Hinduism. Hindu word was for the first time used in 1000 AD. Caste system is much prior to that. Vedic period, Buddhist period, and other. So Hinduism is the word used by Albumi to designate the people beyond Sindhu River. So it's a geographical term. And since in Persian there is no yes, for yes there is yes, they began to use Hindu. So Hindu is in the geographical term. And then of course, around that word there were organization, Hindu Mahasabha, then the concept of Hindu Rashtra developed by Savarkar and other. But they don't define what is ideology of Hinduism. There is no ideology of Hinduism. What is essentially is the Brahmanism. You may call it a Vedic Brahmanism or a new Brahmanism, but Brahmanism, which has a religious ideology, which has a social ideology in terms of caste. That's the first clarification I give. And Dr. Ambedkar also mentioned quite clearly that Hinduism is a later concept. What basic is the Brahmanism. There is a very interesting article by him in his new Marathi newspaper. I translate this. What is the religion of Hindu society? And they clearly to one thing, as far as they which examine vis-a-vis the majority, that is Muslim, Sikhs, Christian, Jain, Buddhist, and Hindus. So there are inter-regional disparities, religious disparity I have examined, which came out with the finding that the worst sufferer are Buddhists and the Muslim compared to Jain and the Christian and the Hindu majority. But Ambedkar has 4 essays on converted Christian in volume 5. If you are interested to know his view on this, converted Christians.
So we have another question by Sudarshan Kumar. He's asked that how do you see gender discrimination within caste when we talk about equal opportunities in the context of inclusive growth?
There is a very standard discourse now on the interface between caste and gender. In India, as well as they took quite a lot from the USA, when the African American woman began to talk that our problem is not only gender, but our problem is also race. So gender has a intersectionality with the race. And that is how the entire discipline of racial gender issue with respect to race has come. Same thing has happened here. There is a book by Arya, I think, on Dalit patriarchy, Dalit feminism. The central argument is this, that the Dalit woman's problem is not only gender. They suffer from gender discrimination within the family. There is no doubt about it. But they also suffer from caste and also poverty, class. So therefore, the Dalit women are more at the bottom because of the triple exploitation, as it were. The caste, the gender, and the class, the economics. While the high caste women only suffered from the gender discrimination, not the caste discrimination as such. Some of the poor women among them, they suffer from class also. In my book, there is a separate essay on this. I have taken several indicators and studied the difference between the Dalit woman and the high caste woman, the tribal woman and the high caste woman. But the Dalit woman and Dalit men also. So I brought out gender differences by comparing Dalit woman with the Dalit men, but also Dalit woman with the high caste woman, a gender intersectionality. And also their poverty. Similarly, for women, for religious women, also I did Muslim versus majority woman to get the religious aspect of the gender, and also the then Muslim men and Muslim women. So gender aspect is also brought into that. Those cross-sectionalities are very complicated. One has to catch up that. But I collected the data, official data, and there is a paper there which brings out the deprivation of the woman, selective deprivation of the woman. Dalit woman deprivation is being different than that of high caste woman and Muslim woman. And also there are similarities, of course.
So we have another question from Karthik. He's asking if you have any suggestions on the areas of research for young scholars so that we can help extend and develop the literature of economics of caste in a meaningful way.
Oh, yes, I think there's a lot of scope that you can do research on the economics of caste and discrimination associated with caste and untouchability, and its intersection with gender, intersection with religion also. And discrimination in various market, discrimination in various non-market institutions, discrimination if you want to cross over to economics, political science, you can study there. So there's a whole lot of area where discrimination, identify the nature and forms of discrimination, causes, consequences, and remedies. So I have just, now there is just the beginning, I think, but at the moment, the blog by caste and 2 books of mine which are coming, they will give the concept and method of measurement and how to prepare the schedule and all that, so that studies can be conducted. Now there is no lack of concept and method of measurement, but there are several spheres where discrimination exists, which we have not been able to examine. There's a lot of scope, and so and intercaste inequalities in many spheres, and explain those inequalities in terms of discrimination and other factors, and also the remedies. The remedy is very important. Every caste is asking for a caste-specific remedy now. The reservation started with scheduled caste, switch over to the tribe, OBC. Now individual castes like Jat and Marathas are asking. Women got reservation, political reservation. DNT, denotified tribe and nomadic tribe. So, the India has this problem of group disparities. The key problem of group disparities, in addition to interpersonal disparity, is the key thing. And why group disparity persists between caste, between religious minority and majority, between male and female, between racial group, between color group, and what are their causes and what remedies can be suggested. Discrimination faced by the people from Northeast in Delhi, in Bangalore, has come out now. So racial discrimination, we have done a study, IITs have done a study. But there are no study on color as much as the people from the South who are dark color, how do we face discrimination in employment and others. So there is a vast area of intergroup inequalities, their causes and their consequences and remedy which is required. Therefore, I form an association. I do not know whether you are aware about it. Association of Academic for Social Justice. The first conference was in Bangalore. Now, this time it might be in Madras or in Hyderabad. To bring the scholar, young scholar, on this issue of group inequalities and their causes and remedies, not only in economics, but also political sphere, in politics, social, anthropological, religious, psychological, another sphere. Use scope.
Hello, thank you very much. This is Dr. Sarat Malik. I thank you very much, Prof. Thorat.
Yes.
Are you able to hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was in Kaveri Hostel, you are my warden. So it's a good interactions with you. And also I studied in JNU. Thank you very much. It's a very good lecture you have given and talking about the economic inequality, social inequality, Manusmriti, and others. So my point is that now when the market economy is there and people from the scratch, irrespective of the caste, they're coming up and setting up business for themselves, whether it is higher caste and the four caste which you mentioned, okay, and even the Dalits also. Many people have come up and they have set up the businesses and they provide opportunity, employment opportunity to others instead of seeking opportunity in the higher castes. So, as you during your course of lecture, you have mentioned that it is. What I gather is that it is very difficult to distribute the land now because we know that the scheduled castes are landless and they are not giving economic rights, property rights. So, can you suggest some measures or some policy measures where the government can really push the scheduled castes or the oppressed class to come up in the business and set up their own factories and compete with the others?
Thank you, sir.
Because
Thank you, sir.
Dalit Chamber of Commerce, they are doing it. So, what are your suggestions to
Yes.
improve it? Yeah.
No, obviously the Dalit were untouchable, were not allowed to undertake business. And but during the British period and later on, we have now they have the right to own property and undertake business. There is no at the legal level there is no problem. But the Dalit business person, they face discrimination while conducting the business. Now, how do you study the discrimination of the Dalit entrepreneurs or those who are involved in the business? The first book was brought out by the Dalit Capital, I think, I don't remember his name, who is in Tata Institute, Hyderabad. He brought out those the difficulties and discrimination faced by the Dalit businessman. In my second book, there is a chapter on discrimination faced by the Dalit businesses in rural area. And I think that will be applicable to the urban area as well. Now, the chapter on the Dalit businesses include from the rural area, therefore the transporter, the restaurant owner, and grocery owner. And the discrimination come out very clearly and come out in a very rampant form. the grocery owner, they say that we don't have a high caste customer at all. Very few of them are high caste, and whenever they come, they purchase only the goods which are packed. They will never buy the open goods. So their demand is confined to their own caste. The volume of their demand being low, their income is low, profit is less. They also face discrimination in buying the groceries. They also face discrimination in location of their shop. They face difficulty in having a grocery shop in the main street or near the high caste locality. So they have to locate their shop in their own locality where less customer. So often they go to the other markets where their caste certainty is not known. So they face problems. The discrimination is quite clear in the restaurant owner. No high caste customer will come there. Very few of them will come. So they have to again depend on the customer of their own caste. Same is the case with the transporter. They share with us through the questionnaire that generally the high caste prefer the auto rickshaw owner of their own caste or taxi owner of their own caste. So the discrimination in the business is very rampant, but no studies. So this is one of the most important area where you people should undertake research and see how policies can be developed. I suggested certain policies that since the major discrimination is sale of the output, then some protection should be given by the state. So I had suggested that on the pattern of Malaysia, government should make purchases from the scheduled caste businesses of the good which government required. And they finally accepted. I think that was in 2010 or 11. And now there is a reservation in purchases by the MSCB, small, medium and micro enterprises ministry. I think about 20% of them government purchases can be from the scheduled caste, so that you are giving a market support to the scheduled caste. But there are other ways, giving them capital, loan at subsidized rate. The discrimination is more in the milk and vegetables, where pollution is very high. In the Haryana study, which is published in Blog by Caste, the high caste won't buy milk from the Chamar and the Valmikis. They won't buy vegetable from Chamar and Valmikis, also groceries. Even they share that even the cooperative society, milk cooperative, will not allow them to sell the milk simply because the high caste will oppose that if you take the milk from the Valmikis and include in your milk, we won't sell it. So it's a serious problem. So then the Valmikis told us, there are case studies that why should we buy buffaloes and cows? Government has a scheme to buy buffaloes and cows and goats. What is the use of it? So there are serious issues which need to be studied. But I think this with all this difficulty, there are now, Dicky is there, and there are many. The lists are into business. Right? That's not the case. I think 14 to 15% of household in rural area are self-employed household, engaged in business. About 25% at all India level, 25% in the urban area are into business. But the bulk of them are into the petty business, and there also they face discrimination.
Sir, if I may ask one small question for my own research, it's important. Do you think this existence of casteism helps in keeping the wage rates low under capitalism?
Obviously, yeah. You have to work out this. You have you read my book, this Scheduled Caste and Labor Market?
Not yet, sir. No, not yet, sir.
Because read,
I will
no?
read. I will. Yes, of course.
There
Sorry,
is
sir.
there is a chapter on wages.
Right, sir.
And invariably, the average wage received by the scheduled caste regular salaried worker is lower than that of a high caste. So there is a wage differentiation. So if the wages of the scheduled caste are lower than their productivity, so if you take that average will be lower than the wage if you give based on the marginal productivity. So obviously discrimination separates the wages.
Right. Preksha, I think there is one more question, is it?
Yes, sir.
Rajiv Khanna, yeah.
Yeah, Rajiv, sir, would you like to ask? Should I just go ahead? Okay,
You can
so
read it out. Yeah.
yeah, so Rajiv sir has asked that you mentioned about Akerlof's work on economic discrimination. I believe his theorization is extension of his seminal paper, Market for Lemons, where he talks about failure of market due to asymmetry of information, which he then uses to extend his argument for employment for blacks. Would this be called discrimination or market failure?
No, this is the discrimination lead to market failure. What is market? Market is that at a given price, you should get all information. You can buy goods and services. And you should also get information. Whatever price is there for information, you should get information. Now, insofar as there is a discrimination in the information sharing, it results into the market failure. Market is essentially say that there is sale and purchase and exchange of services at a given price, market price. Here is a group which would like to have an information at a market price he or she doesn't get. So for him, it's a denial of market. It's a market failure.
If anybody has
This book by, what is his name? I always forget his name, Dalit Capital. He has studied a separate chapter on social network. How the Dalit entrepreneurs are not allowed to become a part of the network. Cheat fund, for example, or brokers, because they get information about the fluctuation in the prices and other things. So they are well in advance, they get information. Which stock will go up, which stock will go down. And accordingly, you organize your business. They don't have that access. There is a discrimination there. There is a paper again by the Canadian scholar who has said that on no board of the companies, you hardly find a scheduled caste. If you are not a member of the board, how do you get the information?
If any other participant has any other questions, you may either unmute yourself and ask Professor Thorat directly, or you may write it on the chat box.
I think Sir is speaking for last 2 hours continuously. It was a long session.
It's okay. Another 15-20 minutes, no problem.
Is there any other question?
Yeah, so I will take the liberty to extend the conversation. It was a brilliant, after a long time I've heard such a brilliant exposition of the subject. Thank you, sir. I was long back in JNU, though I never studied under you, but I knew you. I was in CSP. So I never got a chance to study from you, but I've always been hearing about you and the wonderful work you're doing for, particularly for the Indian context. Just a clarification on what my question on the Akerlof's lemons principle was that there is no doubt about today huge discrimination that exists. So I'm not trying to justify anyway that what exists. All the though there may not be institutional barriers may have been lifted after Ambedkar's work, after independence, a lot of laws have been passed. Yet the social barriers still continue to remain and remain an obstacle for free mobility of labor and capital across the castes. So there is no denial of it. That's why my question was that what can we do? What specific policies more than what has been done can be done so that we can possibly have a path ahead of us that, okay, now this much more we need to do. The point of the market failure I was talking about was in Lemon's principle, asymmetry of information is about the employer does not know much about the candidate because he comes from a community whose average education level and the average skill level is low. Even though he may be qualified, the employer goes by an understanding of an average qualification or capability of that person. So market for lemons was basically for sold cars, second-hand cars to be sold. So the person who owns the car, he knows what is the quality of the car, but the person who's buying the car He does not know. He goes by the average quality of second-hand cars that are being sold. So what happens is the good cars, they go out of the market because they don't want to sell at a lower price, at the average price when the cars are good. So the moment the good cars go out of the market, the average quality also goes down. So average price offered is also goes down. So I was talking about that phenomena, that the discrimination, definitely there's a discrimination, there's a bias of understanding about the capability, but the lower prices offered are because the average capability understanding of the general employers or the people who trade with them or business, that is where the problem arises. That's what I call my market failure. That does not mean that I do not subscribe to the belief that there is a huge discrimination that exists in the society.
Sure.
No, in fact, it is precisely on this point, the Kenneth Arrow developed the theory of labor market discrimination, precisely picking up that information point. You know that the employer, there is a cost associated with to judge the productivity. If you want to hire somebody, you have to have a written test, you have to have viva, and it involves cost. Now, the employer, what does employer does then? That instead of doing that, he has certain faith and belief that the woman and the black, there is a general prejudice that they have low productivity vis-a-vis the whites or high caste or male. So the judgment of hiring by the employer is determined by those beliefs, and those beliefs may not be correct. It is quite likely that some black individual may be more efficient than the white, and the white which are hired, they have a low productivity. So if he is avoiding the cost of undertaking interviews, there is a cost of knowing the productivity. So I think the same is extended here. That is why there is a market failure. What you have said about Akralov's paper on Lehman, yes, certainly that's right. But I was also linking with this.
Thank you very much,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thanks a lot
Yeah.
for taking out time for this talk under your extremely busy schedule. On behalf of Delhi Economic Society, I would like to say thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And also, we need your blessings and your wishes for our journey. I mean, this is the first lecture of the Delhi Economic Society. So we have some plans. We'll conduct some general body meeting soon, and then we'll decide what is to be done, how to go about it. But I mean, our first lecture has started with this brilliant lecture by you, which will surely give us a perspective going forward. So thank you very much, sir. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Wish you all the best.
It was a fascinating lecture, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much.
Shall I leave now?
Thank you, sir.
Yes,
Shall
sir,
I?
please.
Okay.
Yes, please, sir.